I asked these kind gentlemen, how do I introduce you? They said, it's very simple. What we do is we take a truck, drive it up to your back door, open the truck, take the money out and leave it with you. On that basis, and you may consider that overclaim, we'll see if it's true or not, I'd very much like to introduce you to Mr. Euan Mackenzie and Mr. Brian Williamson. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to make this as interesting as it's possible to make. And I don't know if you remember the time you were on your first date and say, well, how could you move from a fairly boring subject to one that's extremely interesting? And I'll just ask you to watch this for a minute.
The more meat we eat, the more cows there are producing greenhouse gases.
So, if you're on a boring date, flatulence is always a good icebreaker. I'm going to talk about a piece of legislation that's been in since the year 2000, and the relevance of the cow is, to try and give you some comparison, is what really is R&D about a cow? Well, we have a number of customers that surround the cow, everything from the people that produce better and more yieldable crops. I was in Belfast this week talking to someone who spreads slurry and has a clever piece of technology for doing that. A bit of a shit stirrer, I guess. So anyone at that end, anything that the cow produces in the way of milk, cheese, butter, there's research and development that goes on in there and you don't actually realise it. As far as the parts of the cow are concerned, if you're trying to improve everything from the shelf life, from the abattoir to the supermarket, there's research and development in there. We signed up a client this week that actually takes the cow hide, and if any of your games companies are going really well and you've got an Aston Martin, well, it's one of our customers that provide the leather in there. And everything from even capturing the methane gas and how you do it, a thermal energy plant, lots of people looking at how can they use the byproduct of manufacture and how can they use that power and recycle it back and reduce landfill. So even a cow, we could substitute in there anything you really want that's made, and there would be a whole host of R&D around that. Just to say, so you know this, there's technologies that you wouldn't associate with this piece of legislation. On the left-hand side are what I would call lower technology, on the right-hand side higher. So if we do a lot of pie makers and bakers, jam makers, printers, everyone who processes food, there's a whole host in there, and they're doing lots of things to produce products in a different way that gives them challenges. On the right-hand side, it's more easier to recognise games and animation in there, but there's also, we work with companies, Applied Mathematics, work with a client which is based here in Edinburgh, works for NASA, and they produce the artificial intelligence that goes inside the remote-operated drones that fly into war-torn areas that come down, look at a meeting like this, and the drone itself decides what to do. It has its own embedded intelligence. So it's anything from pie making to that artificial intelligence. So what's the relevance to the games industry? Well, what was shown earlier on was the animation, and we actually work for animation companies and game companies, because the challenges in producing your product, be it games or animation, can be, you have a standard package, you're looking at how can you get better rendering on sea, sky, water or fire or whatever, how do you get shadows, anything to do with a challenge. Normally that's seen by companies as this is what we do and this is the difficult industry we're in. Actually, you'll be doing thin slices of eligible expenditure, and because you're doing that, the government gives you cash back for that, and I'll explain how that happens. So how much is being lost? I did this calculation. We are here in Scotland, and there is close on £1 billion being verified by HMRC, independent accountants as well. The government only gave away, I think, 960 million last year. So in Scotland alone, there's more money to be got than was actually given away in the whole of the UK. So if you multiply that across the UK, it's actually massive. So why do people not claim? Well, if I had to, it's all about terminology is the first barrier. If you look at the picture there, and I had to ask everyone in the room, would you like to draw a picture of blooming? You'll probably draw a tree in spring, or a tulip, or you'll draw a flower in summer. And actually, if I had to say to you, blooming is the terminology for crystallized unmelted sugar in chocolate manufacture, you would say, oh, there's two meanings for blooming. So you would add that to your hard drive and say, I need to compute this and work out which one I'm talking about. Well, when it comes to research and development, the challenge is that if I had to ask everyone in the room what's research and development, you'll probably draw a white coat, a pipette, a test tube, or a lab, and that would be your impression. So that's in your hard drive. So when I say, are you doing research and development, you access your hard drive and say, white coat, pipette, test tube, that's not us. So terminology is the first barrier. And unfortunately, they've put tax credits at the back of it. So you might say, am I doing research and development? I'll ask the white coat. And for the purposes of gaining tax credits, I'll ask the pinstripe suit. So in actual fact, you're more likely to go towards an accountant and you'll ask a financial person a technical question. So the failure actually comes in that terminology to begin with, because people don't really understand that there's a meaning of research and development that HMRC have that allows you to access funds, and that's quite different from what probably is in most of your hard drives. The vision at the bottom here is formula represents a technical understanding of what you do. So if you're producing code, algorithms, writing programs, then you technically understand what you do, and that's a fundamental requirement of making a technical submission to back up your claim. So you must know technically what the business is doing. When it comes down to that's not sufficient, you actually have to have read through the comprehensive legislation. You can view it on HMRC's website. It should be as well to be in Portuguese at times because it's really difficult to read. We do it every day and we find it difficult. Unless you know these two, then actually the chance of you getting your claim right is fairly minimal. However, if you get that technical understanding, you map on top of that what elements of the technical challenges you've had are eligible under the legislation, then that's where you see your claim rise to this level. So how would we find R&D? Well, we'd look at, first of all, top left, we'd look at your objective. If you're trying to bridge that uncanny valley, we'd say, well, what are you trying to do here? And where's the overall technical challenge in what you're doing? The second thing is you may be using standard packages for whatever, rendering or whatever. We'd be looking at, are these actually satisfactory for your purposes? If they're not, then they're actually a piece of eligible expenditure that you're enhancing. So we'd look at your raw material that you use in order to make or manufacture animations and games. If you're producing a packaged product, we do a lot of packaging and printing companies. People don't realize that even the change to a physical size of a package can involve eligible R&D. Going through the middle, if you're looking at your actual programmers, your developers and what they're doing, we'd actually go into the detail of what aspect of what they're doing could be eligible. Bottom left, you might be trying to do something faster. Speed, it might be necessary for different platforms. If we're doing the same thing as someone else does, isn't eligible. Doing the same thing as someone else does and trying to do it at a different speed can be eligible. Different size. So you may well be downsizing or upsizing. If you look at some of the challenges even, we have clients who have produced particular images on a PC or screen format, but when they project them, the colours actually change quite dramatically, which is fundamental to their requirements. That can lead to eligibility on how can they solve that problem. Your hardware, if you're doing anything with hardware that can be classified as eligible. I met a customer who's putting in a new brewing plant this morning, and a lot of the work they're doing experimenting in how to try and get their beer better. We can classify that as a piece of eligible R&D, and they get to write off the cost of that in 1 year. And finally, waste. This is meant to depict waste, but if there's anything you're doing that hasn't worked, it's a fantastic route to look at. You want to look at mistakes, problems and issues. if something's been issued to the field and it has to be either recalled, fixed or patched, then if it's an issue and a mistake was being made, it's not eligible. However, if it has been as a result of something you've discovered and never realised that when I had so many users, actually the dynamics of this whole thing changed, you will probably be discovering something that could be eligible. So I'm going to hand over to my Anthea Redfern assistant here.
Thanks, Brian. Right, you'll see these. I first came across Jumpstart because there's some of these at the back, and we've got some up here. I first came across Jumpstart when Andy Campbell from the games industry kicked me on the arse and said, Euan, come and speak to these people because they'll save you an awful lot of money. And if any of the Scottish people know Andy, I know a lot of people do know him from Visual Sciences and now Special Move. Actually, Jumpstart had knocked on my door 2 years before that, and I'd ignored them. And I'd ignored them because my very highly paid tax accountant at 3MRT had told me that we weren't eligible for tax credits. That 2-year gap between claiming and that moment cost me personally £250,000 because I listened to my accountant. So when we went to Jumpstart and we went in and we went through the process, what was eligible, and I can talk about that in the next slide. How long did it take? It took me 7 hours of my time over a period of 2 months. I got back £35,000 per hour that I worked on the project to get that back. That's me personally. So my time as the managing director of the company to put it in got £35,000 back, which is not a bad return on my time. It's the best return I've ever had in my life, trust me. And why was it never done before? Because the accountants told me it wasn't eligible. Now, what I've done is taken a kind of scenario that a lot of independent studios got. Now, you can be a small indie, you can be a big publisher. It doesn't matter. You're all eligible. So this is a kind of a possible custom company that some of the smaller developers in the room might see. You're doing a little bit of AAA development, maybe a level contract with a bigger publisher. You're doing a console port, and you're doing some of your own IP, maybe on iOS. Now, every aspect of that will come under some sort of eligibility because every part of one of those projects will be eligible in some form or other. If you're not breaking even, which is often the case, brilliant. You know, loss-making companies, super, you get a markup. If you are breaking even, great, you're going to get a lot of money back as well. Now, I got £140,000 back with 10 staff, which I thought was pretty good. I did the maths there, I think it was about that. All the work that was done for me was done on a contingency basis. So when these guys came in, I didn't do anything. They just came in and did the work. I did my 6 or 7 hours with them after they'd done the work, and we made an awful lot of money. So when they literally came up to my back door, opened the truck, and the money fell out, it actually saved the studio for that year. Now, I did a quick calculation in my head, and I would say if you've got a games developer doing this kind of work and any kind of work in the games field, and I've been watching the speakers from games companies over the last 2 days, and it's funny because I'm going, that's eligible, that's eligible, that's eligible. You're looking at about £3,000 per annum per developer at the moment. That's a rough figure. It's anything between 1 and 5, depending on what they're looking at. But the great thing is you can get accountants in there as well. So if an accountant is working on a project, that part of their time on an eligible project will be claimable as well. So all I can suggest you do is look at this. Look at the pack. Yuki have produced this with us, and it's got a little booklet in it, and it will tell you all you really need to know. No matter how small you are, have a look because you're probably eligible, and it's a great way to leverage finance. And I'll pass back to Brian now and go back there. So come and speak to me afterwards or at questions.
So just quickly, the last couple of slides to wrap up. You may wonder, why is the government giving this money away? HMRC are usually associated with taking the shirt off our back, but this is a totally different department. Their raison d'etre is to give money away. They actually are desperate to give money away. You have to tick the boxes. They are accountable for spending public money. So as long as you tick the boxes, you will get it. The government have, this was introduced by a Labour government, extended by the Tory government or the coalition, and it was as a result of the Dyson report that looked at the 5 areas of innovation from early school innovation right through to research and development tax credits. And what's actually happened is, on the recommendation of Dyson, they've actually implemented that change. So this year, for every £1 you spend, you actually get an enhancement of a further £1, which means if you pay tax at 20% or are eligible to pay, you don't have to have paid it, you'll save 20p. So it's a big thing. And next year it's been increased yet again, so it'll be £1.25 enhancement for every £1. So it's a massive thing. It's used by 42 countries in the world as an economic development tool. So this isn't something that's been dreamt up by an accountant to avoid tax. This has been dreamt up by 42 governments who actually use this as an economic development tool. Interestingly, this is a great piece of legislation because you can go back 2 financial years. If your year end is just the same as the calendar year end, you can at the moment claim for 09 and 10, and you can obviously claim for 11 when it's finished. When you move to the 1st of January 12, the orange year will go green and 09 will disappear. So if your year end is looming, you're about to lose the ability to go back to one of your previous years. So as we always say, the average company will get about £40,000 a year for an SME. It's quite a wide average, but you could be losing £40,000 if you're surrendering losses. It could be as high as £60,000. So year end's important. A wee bit about our people. The difference is, although I just noticed I've actually got a pinstripe suit on, but all our people are technologists, so they're normally PhD qualified, minimum honours graduate in different disciplines. So for mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, games and software specialists, biotechnologists with 3 PhD chemists. And they have been plucked out of industry. They've not come out of university straight away. We've plucked them out of industry, and we've taken these individuals and spent 6 months training them in the legislation. And then we let them loose on clients, because when they're having a discussion with a software client about the algorithms they're writing, they know exactly which part of the conversation is eligible and which isn't. Just a very quick track record. Biggest single applicant in the UK. We've done over 2,100 claims. We've got a 98.6% record. We'll have to put that up because some companies go bust during the process, dare I even tempt the thought. But we did the claim for Real-Time Worlds in Dundee, which actually went bust during the process. The challenge with that is it's actually going through the courts because they're still eligible to claim even though they're in administration. So we went on to work for the administrator. They're likely to change the law as a result, but there's a £2 million claim going through the courts at the moment. We work with all. We've gone down as far as 5 or 6 employees, depending on the intensity of work people have done. Biggest customer, turns over 1.4 billion, has 6,000 employees. If someone's been claiming before and say, well, I'm actually getting some money back, we get an average 3.9 times. And we don't slip anything by the revenue if we're not sure. And we can give you examples, if you wish, about how we collaborate with HMRC. We have a charter agreement with HMRC. If we are not sure about the eligibility of a particular aspect of what someone's doing, we will always ask. So, and Euan's up there with his pinstripe suit on. You probably haven't seen that for a while. And that's us, if there are any questions.
Hi there. I'm kind of atypical of that thing that was up on the screen there of a new indie developer. I've just got in touch with some guy from Sweden that does programming, and we started making a game, and there's no budget, there's nothing, there's zero. So we're trying to get people with talent involved, and we're trying to get the game pushed forward and things like that. It's a kind of first-person mage type game, and we're kind of struggling. We're kind of arguing about should we buy things on the cheap and sort of spruce them up to look unique, but we feel a wee bit cheated that it's not original and things like that. So I mean, is there a jump start that I could benefit from this?
At the moment, because you're not actually paying salary, no. What you could do, we have a kind of scheme for small companies because we're dealing with a lot of, particularly in the games and technology, where we just help you and put you, particularly through Yuki as well, where they've given a discount, but where we'll actually guide you on how to manage projects, because you will probably get some government funding at some point along the line, and you've got to be careful that doesn't impact on later credits. So we'll certainly give you advice on that. But from what you're saying, subcontracting in itself to Sweden is not an issue, because as long as you're telling the subcontractor exactly what you want and how to do it, and your spec is quite well defined, the intellectual property, well, it's not to do with the intellectual property, it's to do with the innovation being with you. Yeah. So along the line, if you do eventually pay them, there's a chance that will be eligible. But at the moment, not really. There's no cash available for that, unless you were going to grant funding, which is a different source, obviously.
So maybe once the game does sell,
absolutely,
and we can look back and make.
Absolutely, that's where you.
The trigger is cost. Is if you look at a lot of small companies, take minimum salaries, £500 a month, very sensible. Make sure there are any liabilities, and they take everything in dividends. You can't claim for dividends. You can only claim for above the line. So. The costs that go into your hopper is what you claim for. If you're very clever and having no cost going into your hopper, you can't really get a benefit. But remember, it's only 20p in the pound. You don't want to spend a pound to save 20p. But if you're going to have to do it, then this is a sensible way to do it.
Yeah. You don't know how successful you're going to be. I mean, we're working with one iPhone developer who started with three staff 13 months ago, and now they've got 15 and a turnover of 7 figures. So they didn't anticipate their success. And probably everybody in the room has one of their games on their iPhone. And, they started off, literally when I first spoke to them, they were 3 people, and they say, are we going to be eligible by the end of the year? Yeah. Big time.
Well, this is one of the other things that I do on the side. I develop for the iPhone, but I'm kind of restricted with that as well, time-wise. Sure. But yeah.
No, I mean, the scenario there is one I've come across so many times, not just in Scotland, but in England, and in so many years in gaming, the kind of half... a weak contract-driven IP. By the way, the other key thing I wanted to say there was the IP can be the studios, as long as you're doing the innovation at your side. And for the bigger studios who are giving this work out, if you specify, for example, AAA level, you might be getting all the tools and the scenes and the platform from the studio. But there may be additions you're making to that software, which would then remain, even though the IP is contracted back to the major studio, the innovation is yours, so you can claim on that. But it's also good for the bigger studios who are outsourcing stuff to use it as a tool for leveraged finance when they're actually paying studios to do work for them, because they can introduce the studios to the tax scheme, and then there's more money in the pot for everyone, effectively. Right. So, good. Fred, I think, he's been wanting me to ask questions for days, but in public now.
I didn't ask you this one. I spent quite a long time doing some lobbying on tax credits and getting developers to but I'm going to ask you a more fundamental question about the actual whether they work or not, because putting it bluntly, I've seen quite a lot of commentaries on R&D tax credits which suggests that people just claim them because it's a sensible thing to do, but it doesn't actually encourage R&D very much at all.
Okay. There's a political question. The scheme was brought in by the government to encourage innovation and maintain jobs in the UK. I look at it in a very pragmatic sense that these guys came along and saved my bacon. Okay. Now, the fact is that I think the industry maybe wastes a little too much time complaining that the film industry gets benefits, or the French or Germans gets benefits, when we're sitting on a pile of cash which is probably worth between 40 and 50 million a year just for the games industry. So why spend all our efforts bleating about what isn't there, and say, actually, if I just open this door, there's 50 million quid here, why don't I get some of that? Because that's going to keep your people employed today and give you a better return to your shareholders today, and maybe get your next IP project underway. So for me, that's the situation. I'm not a great strategist when it comes to lobbying. That's for the industry bodies, and but I think a lot of hot air is spoken there. Sure, we've got to work with government, and
you're missing the point.
I know. Well,
because actually, Tiger's point when I was running it was exactly what you're saying. It was these things are available, do it, but people weren't convinced. Because of the complexity of getting it. But the point is, my point is, most companies will do this R&D whether they get the tax break or not.
Yeah, if I can give you an example of that, because we had a discussion with HMRC, a non-games example. We did a speaker manufacturer, and the issue, they moved some of their speaker range from a laminate backing to a GRP backing. The actual noise or sound that came out was actually vastly improved. So they came to us and said, well, we were doing it as a cost-driven project. Our analyst went in and said, well, the granularity of GRP compared to a laminate actually improves it. So we actually discovered a project that they didn't realise was an R&D project. We actually took it to the revenue and said, this is a bit like cheating here. These people haven't done anything as a direct result. It's a cost-driven project. We don't feel this is something we could, without some advice, that we could apply for. And the revenue's approach to that was, unless you know what innovation, research and development under their legislation looks like, how do you know how to do more of it? So they said this speaker manufacturer is being educated by us giving them some tax breaks on, if you're looking at things in the future, perhaps rather than it being a cost-driven project, you might decide to say, how can I improve the sound of my products and my processes? So through that education, there actually is more likely to be innovation. So that's the revenues on this. So this is part education, but it's part funding.
The revenue really are looking for a narrative from the companies. A lot of people bang in claims based on their accountant's assumption of the white coats in the rooms. But there's a small team in Cardiff who are processing most of the claims. There are other people processing them as well. But they're looking for a narrative of the path, the technology path through that, because there's 400 pages in the law. Now, what we're doing effectively is giving them a narrative and saying to the guys in Cardiff, actually, this is not a false claim. Here's the R&D. This is how the technology meets your law. And it gives them an opportunity to give you the money and feel good about it at the same time. This is very much a collaborative process with the taxman. And I think everybody's come at it as a combative one before. So
just one last rider to that. The difference between product development and innovation and or R&D. Are you onto that one?
It's a very grey area. A lot of it is in semantics. And again, I think as Brian's pointed out, we'll work with the revenue. If we have doubt with a client, we'll work with the revenue by asking them questions, by giving them 2 scenarios and letting them make the judge. But product development will include the product itself. May not be innovation in the sense a good business idea might not be innovation, but making a solution for that good business idea, there might be a lot of innovation within that. The two are different. So
you're doing good.
Do we have one more question over there, and then I think we'll draw the session to a close.
Sorry, Sean.
No, that's good.
Actually, no political question, something a bit more practical. 2 questions. First one is how closely are you working with like existing accountants, and how does that normally work? And the second question, because you talked a lot about preparing for it and sending it in, but what happens if they come back and say, okay, there needs to be amendments, and how do you deal with that in the...
To answer the accounts, we work with around 450 accountants throughout the UK in a collaborative approach, and how we do that is we run a number of seminars and webinars throughout the year in an educational sense, because if you looked at the slide that showed you all the different industry sector, accountants find it quite difficult, coming usually from a non-technical background, to be able to have some linkage between research and development in their hard drive and the client, because they've no technical knowledge to do that. So we run educational sessions. Accountants, and perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, looked upon this as, well, you choose Jumpstart or your accountant, when in actual fact, they still fill out the CT600. We tell them the numbers to put on. So it's a very much, we augment the service. The difference is the numbers that we tell them are really big ones as opposed to being quite moderate ones. So from the accountancy perspective, we don't have an issue. We always work in conjunction, and we do that with small 1 or 2 practice accountants, and we do it all the way up to the big 4. So we work with every size of accountant.
What was the second one again,
The second one was what happens if they come back?
Well, the nice thing is that Jumpstart actually handle all that for you. So they'll manage, because they're speaking with the teams every single day, effectively, because they're putting, 50 claims a week now or something ridiculous like that? 50 claims a week. So they're talking to the team at the HMRC every day. So a question will come back and they'll handle it on your behalf. You may not actually ever hear about it unless it's a deep technical question about some part of the process. Then they'll pick up the phone and speak to you. But normally there's a triage between, the main conversation is with, say, the particular project leader. I may spend 1 or 2 hours at the front end of that. And the smaller companies, obviously, that's often the MD or the tech director.
And just to give you, we've had 12 audits out of 2,100 claims, all successful, under 1%. The national average of audits is about 8. They do sampling. Software and IT is the biggest sampled because It's everything from someone who produces a spinning avatar and say my website's really good and my customers can access information that they can't in our competitors, which is just all features and benefits, right through to someone that's doing very eligible work. So software in IT is really abused by applicants, I would say, more than any other area.
The other thing is the goalposts change all the time, because what was innovative yesterday or 6 months ago, you might be working halfway through a project and it might have been eligible last year but might not be this year, because the process or the technology, the underlying core technology, may actually just be standardized now. But a lot of the console work you're doing as developers will often qualify because the console process, whether you be Nintendo or Sony, is often closed within the developer community within there. So it's not public knowledge you're getting. So that actually increases a claim, particularly ports between consoles as well. Data streaming, optimization of data onto mobile devices is a big area at the moment, which is being accepted because you've got to do a lot of that work yourself because it's not out there. So there are lots of little areas you would never consider part of the process that count. So.